I'm half Scottish and half Irish, so I'd like to take this opportunity to disavow any responsibility for the historic crimes of the Anglo-Saxons. President Trump is in office, but is he in power? In the last dizzying days in Washington, we've seen the ability of President Trump to do a Baerbock, an Anna Baerbock, 360 degrees, 180 degrees. He turns hourly, daily. Might this be merely a feature of his personality? Or might it be this, Excellency, that a state of dual power exists in the United States, that the president's bona fides are one thing, and personally I believe that he knew nothing of the terrorist attacks on the Air Force bases in Russia over the last week, but his operatives clearly did. They were clearly operating to the orders of the last administration. I wonder if you think there are some grounds for believing that the deep state in the United States is determined to frustrate any good that President Trump might have in mind.
Я думаю, что в любом обществе, особенно обществе, которое
Well, I think that in any society, especially a society that has been developing for many decades within its political system, the arrival of a bright, non-standard figure to the leadership of a state always, I think, causes some subversive processes aimed at continuing to live as we are used to be indebted, to spend, to spread our ideology. I think that this is not only typical for the United States. You know, in our society, we've talked about this more than once over the last couple of years. There were also people who really hoped that everything would go back to normal, that those who fled, I mean the Western business, would be welcomed with open arms again, and that there would be trips to the Azure Coast, to Sardinia, and so on. And that's it. And life would be established when consumption, in its huge part, in its decisive part, was provided through import. The president said very clearly, speaking about our people, who are not called a deep state in a different way, but the meaning is about the same. And of course, our experience of uniting such characters is not as strong as it is in the United States. But the president said very clearly recently he spoke about the return of business. I don't mind, but honestly, if you flood, left your employees, the niche is occupied, I'm sorry, I suggest something that will be acceptable to us. But most importantly, soon after the start of the special military operation, he said such a thing, speaking about the future of the world. Never again for us, for Russia, for the Russian people, will everything be as it was before February 2022. In other words, he hoped to the last that the projects and agreements of Russia, NATO, and Russia-USA, which we passed on to our colleagues in 2021, that they would still be taken seriously, and that common sense would prevail. It didn't work out. We were not believed. Just recently, in an interview with Vladimir Vladimirovich, a direct question was asked, "So you were naive?" He said, "Yes, I was naive." But this, first of all, means that when we were plagued with such a number of friendly formats and friendly slogans, from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean, common spaces with the European Union, 4 directions: security, economy, infrastructure, humanitarian issues. Common spaces were built from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean, dozens of directions of joint projects, 2 annual summits, annual meetings of ministers of half governments, Russia and the European Union, the Council of Russia and NATO, and much, much more. Swear statements at the highest level, signed by the OSD, that security is indivisible. No one will strengthen their security at the expense of others. All this, of course, was accumulating by inertia, and every time the West proved its complete incompatibility, when it proved that all these beautiful words were needed only for one purpose, to prepare again for the war with Russia for destruction, as they did in the past centuries, but they did not want to believe. Until recently, they tried, and in contacts with Germany, with France, and with London there were contacts. They tried to promote the idea that, guys, we agreed, and they broke off from these agreements piece by piece. And as Victoria Nuland later admitted, they invested in total $5 billion in Ukraine just to make it anti-Russia. Therefore, I am sorry that the American agenda has fallen on our agenda, but the deep state is not unique for the United States. Look, I have already mentioned today how the European Commission, which no one chose at all, and the composition of which is the subject of such an undercover bargain, you are me, I am you, and some characters in this European Commission are worth something. They also play their game in the same way as the deep state does, and they want to raise this deep state. As soon as in some country, the first round is won not by a nomenclatured person, but by a person who, in a good sense, is a nationalist. He may not love us or anyone else, but he thinks about his people. This is the duty of any politician. Immediately, the mechanisms of the type of deep state are included, and everything returns to its circle. Therefore, I sincerely hope that in America there are constitutional norms, that President Trump will not be shy in implementing his constitutional powers, that they will not interfere with him, and that he will receive all the information. I do not know what the situation is with the President's information about the operations carried out by the Ukrainian regime against our country. The fact that there are a huge number of American advisors in the building of the security service of Ukraine is a fact. They have not been removed anywhere. The fact that there are instructors from other states who supply weapons to the Ukrainian regime is also a fact. The fact that they consult the Ukrainian armed forces when planning strategic operations, when placing objects, when masking objects, we also know this. Well, I have already mentioned that a number of modern weapons cannot be used without the direct participation of the servicemen of the countries that have placed these weapons. President Trump was asked on the plane, as I understand it, what he thinks about the latest terrorist attacks. He said that when he heard about it, he immediately realized that the Ukrainians would get their share for this, and they would be bombed to hell, as he put it. I can only perceive and comment on what I heard. How is the President's information on a line of special services established? To be honest, I do not know. We do not interfere in other people's secrets on the line of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.